Negan, leader of the Saviors, versus Rais, the harbinger of chaos himself. Two warlords who rose in power through force, fear, and subjugation. These men have similar roles in their respective universes, which makes me ask, who would win in a battle between these two factions? Negan was the main antagonist of Season 6 through 8 of The Walking Dead, and Kadir Suleiman, otherwise known as Rais, was the main antagonist in Dying Light. So who is stronger? To answer this question, we'll break this down into 3 sections and 2 fights. We'll go over the character and their leadership skills, the factions, locations, and overall influence. The first category will be a fight between both men. The second will be an all-out war between their factions. The man himself, Negan Smith. Before the outbreak and his eventual position of power, he used to be a gym teacher and a gamer. Not too impressive, but those years coaching would be crucial in his ability to lead and motivate others. After his wife died, he would go on and form the Saviors and eventually establish the Sanctuary. He created a system within his group. You could either be a savior or you could be a worker. Through his rule, the Sanctuary prospered, and so his strength grew. Now Negan understood something that Rais himself could never see. People are a resource. Through conquest, Negan subjugated other communities and forced them to provide for him. To ensure people wouldn't attempt betraying him, he created a cult-like mindset where he stripped the identity of his people. They used whistling as a form of fear to tear down those who opposed him even before seeing them. He was ruthless when it came to ruling and conquering others, but not without reason. Sure, he used detestable displays of execution to make a point, but it was always to save lives. There were lines he wasn't willing to cross like children. In terms of combat, Negan is somewhat above average. He's no slouch when it comes to fighting, but he is not the best either. His weapons of choice is a bat covered in barbed wire. Faction, the Saviors. Their numbers are likely somewhere near or over 300 soldiers. Most Saviors were kind of incompetent and were mainly a threat through sheer numbers. The Saviors mainly coerced other communities to serve Negan. They would promise protection in return for goods, but it was just a fancy way of enslavement. Most Saviors are brutal but seem to control themselves as Negan prefers people be kept alive. They were well organized, operating in multiple outposts. There were several lieutenants who controlled the bulk of the force under Negan's command. They were stocked with resources and heavy firepower. They had a machine gun, grenade launchers, countless guns, and ammo, and at one point, they even had a rocket launcher. They had operating vehicles and an effective communication system. Their strength was enough to conquer multiple communities. Now, this part is important. In the show, Hilltop doesn't seem to have many people, but in the comics, it was stated there were around 200 people living in Hilltop. The fact that the Saviors managed to subjugate a force of that size is impressive, even if they were mainly farmers. They've also conquered about 5 different communities that I can think of, which there was probably more. Location. Subjugated communities we know of are Alexandria, Hilltop, the Kingdom, Oceanside for a while, and this library group, which are all dead as we see the last member get killed. The estimated number of all the communities is a range of 100 to 300 people. Their main HQ was the Sanctuary, an old factory. The place is a fortress and well fortified. The only downside of the location is that it lacks the ability to grow any food, which forces them to scavenge and take resources from others. People seem to agree they have a range of 400 workers, which in total might put their numbers around 600 to 700 people. Their outpost consists of the satellite station, slaughterhouse outpost, which was more of a meetup area, chemical outpost, Shepherd office plaza, bullet factory outpost, and the lookout station, which was an industrial research facility. For the better part, these locations had a decent garrison. Overall, the Saviors under the rule of Negan were well established, having various locations and influence over others. They were a dominant force and lost due to plot armor. Rais, a man who seeks absolute control through chaos. Rais was the epitome definition of what a warlord is. He was a colonel in the military, and during the outbreak of Haran, he was tasked with maintaining order. After his brother's death, he went mad and embraced his rage, and all in Haran paid the price. He disregards human life and punishes incompetence. His own men follow more out of fear than respect. Under his leadership, he managed to force the slums in Old Town into submission. People were forced to pay him money or face annihilation. He took most of the antizin, forcing people to work for him. He was a sadistic and uttered no sympathy. Unlike Negan, there were no limits this man wouldn't cross and seems to rather rejoice in the misery of others. faction. Rais gang is a group built of merciless men who control the better part of Haran. They are mainly identified by their black and yellow symbols. Some members wore masks and tactical vests. They were heavily equipped, however the lower ranking members seemed to use melee weapons instead of guns. With most of Haran resources, they made themselves a powerhouse. The number of soldiers was roughly around 100 to 300 soldiers. They were more than effective when it came to controlling other communities, however something to point out is they never took over the tower, which inhabited roughly 30 to 75 people. Their second in command, Tahir, an ex-inmate, he is Rais's main enforcer and ensures the men stay in line. He is a skilled fighter, loyal, and like his boss, sadistic. Side note, they possess a demolisher. Later, after his downfall, Rais's men took over a grain factory. They still seemed to have a lot of men and now had rocket launchers. They also seemed to have more operating vehicles than before. Locations. Their numbers allowed Rais and his men to have various strongholds throughout the slums and Old Town. These locations included Rais Garrison, which was an apartment building, a school that served as a supply dump, and Rais's headquarters, which was a tower, a museum, a radio station, and possibly a few other locations. They were heavily guarded with sizable garrisons, and some of the outposts had zombies crawling all throughout. These locations seemed crucial for Rais's operations and keeping control of Haran. The communities who served Rais were rather small in size, where maybe the biggest had a number of 20 max, with some only having around 5. Overall, Rais's gang managed to conquer an entire city. Not even the dead could oppose him. They had plentiful resources and firepower, allowed them to live like kings in the apocalypse, all until the arrival of one man. Yes, one man forwarded their operations, and that man was Kyle Crane. Now, time to answer the question you all came here for. Who would win? The verdict? Negan. Negan has proven himself in direct fights like when he fought Simon or Rick. He's strong, tactical, and has more screen time showing resilience. Rais, even with the military training, showed little actual combat ability. His only real fight against Crane ended with his death. Giving both their signature weapons, Lucio and the machete, Negan likely wins. Rais might have an edge with his background, but Negan's real-world experience and long-term survival closes that gap. It wouldn't be easy, but Negan edges it out. I just can't justify giving it to Rais even if he had both hands. Now, who wins between the Saviors and Rais gang? Let's look at the differences. Rais men had armor, they had a demolisher at their disposal, and overall they get a point for surviving in a universe that has relatively stronger zombies, or infected. However, it's not like they can control the demolisher, and the thing to point out, a bunch of their soldiers did not have guns. On the other hand, the Saviors seem to have more firepower, and even if Rais men managed to control the demolisher, the Saviors could use their machine gun and end it quickly. And since we are going based on their full strength, then you can make the argument that they have a bullet maker. They were more organized, unlike Rais soldiers who seemed more scattered as they were constantly going after GRE packages. It really does depend on who's attacking who. I don't think Rais has the manpower to take down Negan. Even if they attack the Sanctuary, Negan would see them coming from a mile away. His strength is relative to the alliance of the communities, and even they only won through plot armor. Now, if the Saviors attacked Rais, I think they would have a much harder time than Rais would. Moving through the city and attacking Rais men would be extremely hard. In fact, Rais would probably beat them back. However, I do believe after an exhaustive fight, Negan and the Saviors would win. Realistically speaking, of course, because if you want to use game logic, then Rais gang would win. But we're not using that here. It took an alliance of about 4 communities to defeat Negan, and they still only won because the plot demanded it. Rais gang was taken out by 1 man. I have to give the win to the Saviors. They had a larger operation, more soldiers, and somewhat of a better leader. I guess I'm gonna end it here. If you disagree or I forgot to mention anything, please let me know. But I give both wins to Negan and the Saviors. Like, subscribe, or don't, as long as you enjoyed the video.